It is time for Around the 412 with Smitty and Tyler.
Welcome back to another episode of Around the 412. I'm Tyler. With me, as always, is my co-host Smitty. Be sure to follow us on all of our social medias at Around the 412. And also, if you're listening on the listening platforms, whether it's Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you check us out, or you're listening over on YouTube, we got a couple links in the description of the show. We've got our friend Haley Wagner's small business, Everything Custom Designs. It is a Facebook link and an Etsy link. Sorry. I had to think about which link I was going to say first. Facebook and it's both of them. We got a couple of options for you, Facebook and an Etsy link. She can do all the sorts of customized clothing for you. No hats, unfortunately, but we are too close to Christmas, I would say, to be able to get any of the Christmas merch. But she's got all sorts of other stuff to be able to check out. I know Smitty's got some Around the 412 stuff. I don't know if Smitty has some other stuff. My mom's ordered some stuff from her as well. There's all sorts of stuff that she can do.
Jump start on Valentine's, maybe.
Valentine's Day, maybe. If you're into hearts and that sort of thing, I don't know. Maybe my wife would like something from it, but we'll see. I don't know. Either way, we've got a couple links for you to go check out down in the description, wherever you're listening to this show. And this is also the Steelers show. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to just say an intro without rocking around the 412 because that was just ingrained in my head for 6 months. And so now it's like I'm not sure how to get out of this. So I'm just going to stop talking.
Yeah, I get it. All right, yeah. So this is the Around the 412 Steelers show for the third straight episode, Tyler. We're talking about a loss. This team was 7-4.
First time this year that we were on like a big losing streak, by the way. Last week, it was the first time they lost back-to-back games. Now they're on a losing streak, I think, officially.
Well, you know what's crazy, though, is every year for the last 6 years, they've had at least one 3-game losing streak, which is insane to think about. But, yeah, so a loss to the Colts this past Saturday puts them at 7-7, the outside of the playoff hunt right now. They need to win out, plus get help at this point, no longer control their own destiny. This is a team that sat at 7-4 with back-to-back home games against the Cardinals and Patriots. We thought smooth sailing to at least 9 wins here, and this team is still chasing their 8th. And who knows what the quarterback situation is going to look like. We will talk about all that. Who knows what the safety situation is going to look like. We're going to talk about all of this, but really, man, things went south in this game on Saturday in a hurry. They jump out to a 13-0 lead. Don't get me wrong. Being a Steelers fan, like I knew there was no way they were going to, blow this team out of the water just because they jumped out to an early 13-0 lead. But I liked what I had saw early in this game. Up to that point, like Mitch was taking care of the football. They did a big play on special teams, a block from Connor Hayward, setting them up at the 1-yard line. Deontay Johnson catches a touchdown. Things were looking pretty good, all things considered with where this team was at. And then things just fell apart. They gave up 30 unanswered in this one to lose 30-13. Didn't even end up being close. One of the few times this year where I didn't finish watching a game. But, man, where do we even want to start with this? Let's talk about the quarterback situation because Mitch Trubisky, who started this game, has fallen out of favor, finally, by this coaching staff. He will not start on Saturday, and that is whether or not Kenny Pickett is able to return in time to start this game. If he is not, Mason Rudolph is going to get the nod. We saw Mason Rudolph on Saturday. He actually came in relief in this one, which there was no chance of the Steelers coming back in this football game. I feel like that was just kind of a message like, Mitch, listen, we asked you to do one thing basically, and it's not like totally kill us, shoot us in the foot and put us behind the 8 ball. And you didn't do it. Like he was very careless with the football. So I feel like it was kind of a statement to him. I don't see a way that he's on this roster in 2024. I feel like he's played his last snap, barring obviously injuries to the guys in front of him, putting him back in that position. But one, were you surprised that we saw Mason come into this football game? And 2, do you think this is the right call going forward, if whether it's Kenny or Mason, to sit Mitch down and just not make him part of the equation anymore for the Steelers offense?
I wouldn't say I was super surprised to see Mason. But I think in that scenario, there's only 2 reasons that you put in a guy in a game like this, whether you are when it's what you're putting in your backup quarterback, when the score is out of hand and all that sort of stuff. You're either putting him in to save your starting quarterback, which in this case the Steelers are not doing, or you're putting him in to get his feet wet a little bit and and got to get used to it, and which is what we assumed going into this week. And had been heard and talked about that Mason Rudolph is going to get his first start, which honestly I wanted to mention too, because you said the one thing that not Mason Rudolph, the one thing that Mitch Trubisky was doing that like it's like Tomlin has to say like you don't kill us. Back in 2019, whenever I asked about Mason and Duck why he's starting Duck, and he's like he's not killing us, and Mason that time was the one killing us. So it's just
full circle.
It's full circle. It's funny enough that he's the one that's going to be coming in or could be coming in relief of Mitch Trubisky. You know, I'm not surprised by it. And honestly, that's something that we talked about last week is that the one thing that you can't do if you're Mitch Trubisky's turn over the football, that's one thing that you really struggled with ever since Kenny Pickett has taken over as a starter. The limited time outside of the second half of the Tampa Bay game where he led them to the win last season. Yeah. Outside of that half, every single time Mitch Trubisky has been in there, he's been turning over the ball. He's been costing the offense mightily in his limited appearances. And I think that you have to do something if you are the Steelers offense and if you're Mike Tomlin. Like the situation, and you just mentioned it, they were 7-4. Now you're 7-7. The situation you're in, you're fighting for a playoff spot, and you're kind of behind the 8 ball right now because not only are you still fighting against several teams in the AFC for a playoff spot, you're in a worse situation because now the wild card teams ahead of you, and even some of the people in the hunt ahead of you, are sitting at 8-6. The Browns, who are in the fifth spot in the first wild card, are sitting at 9-5. You're in a worse position than you ever would have thought going into that Cardinals game. And so from that perspective, it's not surprising at all that Mason Rudolph came into this game. It's not surprising at all that if Kenny cannot go, that they would go with Mason Rudolph and just test it out because they kicked the tires on Mitch as a starter again. It's not working. It was not going to work, and they are getting killed with him in there. The turnovers are too costly, man. They cannot generate offense, and if they do happen to generate any offense, they get it blown away with a turnover, and you just can't do that. So if Kenny Pickett cannot go, I feel 100% more comfortable, not that I'm comfortable at all with it, but just more comfortable with starting Mason Rudolph than I do Mitch Trubisky at this point, just to see what he could even do. And honestly, at 7-7 and looking at the rest of the field around you, you better throw everything at the wall because you just have to give it basically one final swing to try to knock yourself into the playoff. I mean, I'm looking at the Steelers. They have to go 3-0 a minimum. I mean, obviously, like that's the max that they can also do, but like they cannot lose a game over these last 3 games if they want any shot at making playoffs. And so you can't keep trotting out the same offense the entire time. And the easiest switch to make an offense to have an impact is quarterback. Was an offensive coordinator, as the Steelers found out. And so when one is not working, you go to another. I'm perfectly fine with Mason Rudolph starting if Kenny Pickett cannot go. However, if Kenny Pickett can go, and I would say even if Kenny Pickett is like 90%, 85%, I would feel more comfortable with Pickett in there than I would Mason Rudolph.
Yeah, I was going to ask that too. I think that's
he's not going to turn over the ball. That's the thing. If the Steelers can ground and pound like they did before Kenny got hurt and move the football that way, I can trust that Kenny is not going to kill them by giving it to the other team. And I know Trubisky can't do that. I don't know if Mason can do that.
Yeah, the one thing that like I've always questioned the entire time where it was like, should we switch from Mitch to Mason, was the lack of mobility. Because and this isn't trying to take anything away or take anything off of Mitch's plate in terms of how much blame he should get for the situation, but he has been running quite a bit for his life behind an offensive line that seemingly has gotten worse as the season has gone on in pass protection specifically. Mason, not the most mobile guy. Like, is he going to be able to hold up behind this offensive line and pass protection? That would be the one thing for me. And typically I would say that Kenny would be able to handle that better, but like lack of mobility for him because of coming off the injury that he is, if he's not 100%, then I think you're kind of questioning that too. So it really going to be a test for this offensive line to be able to keep their quarterback, whoever it is, upright. And I don't think they're going to be able to use their legs as much, regardless of who it is between those two. Like typically Kenny would be able to create something outside of the pocket, but is he going to be able to? I mean, Alan Saunders, my colleague, my co-host of the other podcast that I do, and I were talking about this. There's actually a YouTube clip of Kenny working on during Wednesday's practice over on their YouTube page. You can tell he doesn't look the same, so I question the side-to-side movement. Is he going to be able to protect himself? Is he still going to be able to make plays outside of the pocket? I don't know. So for me, at least right now, I feel less comfortable than I did yesterday about the idea of Kenny Pickett starting, from talking to him, seeing the clip of that, and just kind of everything that I've heard from other people as well, Nick Farabaugh. So as of right now, as we sit here at the time of recording, this things could change. They said, like Tomlin himself said, Thursday's the biggest day to find out who is going to be the starting quarterback. Thursday will really be the day that determines that. We're sitting here recording on Wednesday. So as of right now, I'm saying Mason. And I think Mason would be the best option considering the way that it looks like Kenny would look for this game as we sit here right now.
And from an entertainment factor, imagine the suspense coming full circle with Mason Rudolph.
Is that the last time that they started 3 quarterbacks in one season was 2019 before this year?
I started, yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Because they definitely didn't do that in 2020. That was Ben. And then 21 was also Ben. So
yeah, but Mason had to start that game against the Lions. So there was 2 that year, and then Mitch and Kenny just last year. So, but I don't think there's ever been a third guy within those time frames until between 2019 and this year.
Yeah. Listen, you gotta do whatever you can to win these games, but just from a entertainment factor, I'm more intrigued just as a Steeler fan to see what Mason Rudolph is going to do in a start, because we haven't seen him start in a couple years. I'm more interested in seeing that than I am them trotting out Mitch Trubisky again. These names, dude, they got it. It's ridiculous.
And I agree. I would definitely be starting Mason over Mitch. That's not a question for me. The question is Kenny with a lack of mobility due to his ankle injury, or Mason. And depending on where that at, what it looks like it's at right now, the answer for me there is also Mason. So I don't know. Maybe Thursday's practice will change things. Maybe, who knows how Kenny's going to feel tomorrow, or what he'll look like. We will see. We won't talk about it again on here. But hey, follow us at Around the 412, or follow our personal pages, Zachary Smith PGH and Weiler _Teach33. And maybe we'll talk about it over there tomorrow. But I want to move on from the quarterback stuff, because there's another position where very much in question who we're going to see on Saturday. Patrick Peterson, we know we're going to see play safety on Saturday. Now, the question is who's going to be by him. Minkah Fitzpatrick already rolled out for this one with a knee injury, which I will say, to me, very concerning about his availability for the rest of the season as well. I think they haven't done anything with this, and they're still like, it's wild to see him on the practice report as like DNP when he's already been rolled out. So like we know that he's not going to play this week. I think if they lose this game, he's shutting it down for the season, which I would agree with. If they win this game, maybe he tries to get back at some point for one of those last 2. But when he's rolled out already so early in the week, like Tomlin rolled him out immediately on Monday when talking for a game on Saturday, that tells me it's not just a 1-week thing. So I think Minkah's probably done for the season if I were to guess. Unless they win both of the next 2, then maybe he's able to go for the Ravens one. DeMonte Casey suspended in this one for a hit on Michael Pittman Jr. Originally 3 games plus any potential games in the playoffs should they qualify for them. The regular season suspension part of that upheld today. So he'll be suspended for the regular season, rest of it, the last 3 games, but he could return should the team qualify for the playoffs. And then Trenton Thompson also left this game with a stinger that he has not practiced this week since suffering. So yeah, very thin at safety now. It basically looks the same as the inside linebacker spot. Patrick Peterson is going to play safety in this one. Elijah Riley just came off IR. Maybe Trenton Thompson's able to give it a go. Maybe they're just kind of keeping him down in practice, knowing that like we need this guy on game day now, especially where things are at. Then you're gonna have like Miles Killebrew, who doesn't play defense. Like he's on this team because of special teams. And if he plays on defense, it's really like in the box. Like he's basically a linebacker more than a safety. So man, it does not look good on the back end of things. And while the Bengals don't have Jamar Chase for this one because of his shoulder injury, I still don't think this is a game where you want to be missing what the Steelers are missing on the back end with what they have at receiver.
I don't think there's any game where you want to be missing that.
Sure.
Especially whenever you go one layer up and you see the liabilities that we have in the middle linebacker room. It's basically from our front line back. After you get past that front line, we've got questions of what is our secondary, what's our middle linebacker, like what's everything going to look like because of all the injuries that have racked up. So I think that from that standpoint, like whenever you have questions not only on that third level, but in that second level as well, that makes this even worse. And especially when it's a guy like Minkah Fitzpatrick, who has just been plagued with injuries this season, it feels like. And I joked with you before this, and then you told me that I joked with you, where they're basically just going to have to play dime every single snap and get creative with the packages and just have a bunch of corners playing in the secondary and figure out who's playing where. And then you told me that Patrick Peterson is going to be practicing. He's practicing and playing at safety. I'm like, well, that makes sense because that's kind of the idea I was going with, and that's something that they'll have to live with. Obviously, it's not a game that you want to do that in, but no game is something that you want to have to be able to do that with. And so, yeah, the Steelers are going to have to get creative. They're going to have to, and I feel like this honestly puts a lot of pressure on the defensive line and those pass rushers trying to make it easier on that secondary, because we've always said that that's how the Steelers are built to win these games, especially from a defensive standpoint. That's how they're built to win, is making the quarterbacks uncomfortable, getting quarterback hurries, getting sacks, creating turnovers, all that good stuff. But whenever you are doing that without Minkah Fitzpatrick, that's how we were describing it with Minkah. So when we were without that, it's escalated to a whole nother level. So if you're a guy like TJ, Cam, Alex Highsmith, like I feel like those guys should have a lot more pressure on them this week to make things easier for everybody going on behind them. And I think that's defensively, that's where they're going to have to win this game, is up front. And honestly, we shouldn't. We are hoping that we don't even have to worry about what's going on because of the havoc that's being caused up front.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to have to be very creative on the back end. I think like Darius Rush will probably need a helmet in this one. We saw him play safety. Actually, we saw him play safety live because he had to step into that Titans game that we were both at together and play like 40 snaps in that one. And some of that was at safety. So who knows? Who knows how they're going to use him? But I do think he gets a helmet for this game, which I'm excited about. I've been wanting to see more of him in general. I know the matchups haven't always favored that. I think this is one that does. The Bengals, even, at their best, and I think they deserve a ton of credit for where they're at right now, still being in the playoff mix. They don't do a lot of different things, though, on offense in terms of the number of personnel that they run. They run a lot of 3 receiver sets, 1 tight end, 1 running back. Now, they'll use some different running backs. They got Joe Mixon, they got Chase Brown, and they got, who's the other one? Travion something. I don't know. But they use all 3 of their guys. So they should be, from that standpoint, the Steelers should know how to play. I mean, they've seen the same type of offense for a few seasons now. So I think from that standpoint, they should be okay. But yeah, you're right. I mean, and you could say that I feel like for pretty much every Steelers game, it's going to have to come up front, what they're able to create, the havoc that TJ, Cam, and Alex are going to have to create. I'll throw Keanu Benton in there as well. Larry Ogunjobi's going to have to get after it. Joey Porter Jr. is going to have to erase whoever it is that he's going to be covering. Him and T. Higgins should be a fun matchup when you talk about the size, going against size that both those guys possess. But, who's going to be accounting for Tyler Boyd here? Trent Irwin has burned them in the past when they didn't have Jamar Chase going back to last season. So very interested to see how they match up on that side of things. What about the Steelers offense going against the Bengals defense? The Bengals defense has not been very good this year. They lost both their starting safeties from last year to this year. They just haven't been the exact same defense. Lou Anarumo, though, one of my favorite coordinators. I'm hoping he gets a head coaching gig this cycle so he can get the hell out of Cincinnati. I think he's one of the best at his position. But the Steelers, this is the last game where the offense looked okay. This was, the game where the first game without Matt Canada, the offense put up a lot of yards, not necessarily points, but we thought we were seeing signs of progress, only to lose 3 straight. So this is the last team the Steelers have beaten, now coming to Acrisure Stadium on Saturday. How do you think that the Steelers match up with the Bengals defense? Regardless, if you want to bring the quarterback position into this again, whether it's Kenny, whether it's Mason, if that changes your mind, but everything around it as well.
Well, and that's the sad part, is it all comes down to the quarterback. Because I think that just on paper, skill position wise and everything, I think the Steelers match up pretty well with the Bengals defense. The problem is who's calling the plays and who's running those plays, who's executing those plays. And I hate to make this conversation about coordinators and about a quarterback, and I don't want to take away from guys. I think the receivers, I think the backfield, they are perfectly set up to execute very well from a skill position standpoint against this Bengals defense. I think they have the guys to be able to exploit that. But whenever you have that inefficiency at quarterback, and whenever somehow I think that the play calling, and I might get ostracized for this, but the play calling's worse without Matt Canada. It is.
Yeah, I'd agree.
It is. And I didn't know. I don't think that I thought that if they got rid of him, I definitely didn't think that the play calling would get better, but I didn't think that it would look worse. I thought it would be pretty much the same thing. And so the fact that it is worse and you're having that quarterback problem, I would love to say that this is a good matchup for the Steelers offense against this defense, but I can't, because I don't know what situationally these plays are going to be called, and I don't know how the quarterback is going to handle it, because these past 3 games have shown me that the Steelers have reverted back to not being efficient with moving the football and creating turnovers for the opposing defense. It's something that I can't trust. It's something that I can't even really evaluate what I think, because like I said, Deontay Johnson, George Pickens, Pat Freiermuth, Najee, and Jaylen Warren, all of those guys, I think that they match up really well with the Steelers. And honestly, I think that the Steelers' offensive line with the Bengals' defensive line, I think, is an okay matchups too. I'll
especially without DJ Reader.
That's the thing. I'll throw in the big boys as well with the skill position, but it all comes down to quarterback and play calling, and that's the shame part about this whole thing. Is I cannot evaluate what I think the offense can do, because I don't think they're going to get any good quarterback play, and I don't think they'll get efficient play calling.
Yeah. I mean, I can't disagree with it. So let me ask you this, and this is going to be a pretty polarizing question, I feel like, and I don't know that a lot of people have talked about this, so I'm curious as to what people think. Because I feel like they're going to say no, just because they were ready to just get rid of him regardless. Did the Steelers make a mistake firing Matt Canada?
When they did, yes. That's me using hindsight and knowing that without him, the play calling, in my opinion, got worse. But when they chose to fire him, yes. If you were going into the season with him, you might as well have just rode it the entire way, especially how deep into the season. It's not like they did this in week 4. We were well into the season. We were halfway into the season, and then they decided to do it. So I would say yes, they did something wrong when they chose to fire Canada when they did. If they were going to do it, it should have just been last offseason. That way the Steelers had time to prepare with a new coordinator and a new offense this entire time. Instead, you were ingrained in the same offense. You don't have time to change midseason into a new offense, and you don't even have new coordinators. You're just taking over from what the old play calling was and handing it to different guys to call the same plays. So yes, they did. They made a mistake by doing it when they did.
Yeah, I agree. They made the switch after week 11. What are you going to do at that point? So again, this goes back to the mistake was made before the season. Whether you wanted it to be I wouldn't have brought Canada back, but I sure as hell would have had somebody else on staff that could take over in the event that you do fire him, because I feel like that was a pretty good shot of happening. Clearly that he wasn't going to finish the season with you. So why not have somebody else on staff that has play calling experience, that has developed a quarterback, something so these were mistakes that were made before the season started that couldn't be undone once the season started. And I just kind of got to live with it, but they didn't live with it. They decided to, somehow make it worse from what the situation even was offensively in the timing of firing Matt Canada. So I'm in agreement with you. I think a lot of people would probably say, like, just get rid of him as soon as possible. But I struggle to believe that this team couldn't have squeaked out one of these last well, definitely not the Colts. Arizona or New England, though. I feel like you could have won one of those two games if Matt Canada was still here.
I mean, regardless of how you felt of him as a coordinator, I feel like whenever he was on the team, the offense felt more unified than it does right now. And whether that was unified in their dislikeness for their coordinator or what, it's just
Bringing everybody together.
It feels more unified than it did without him. And
yeah,
there's times this season too where we said on this show, and people acknowledged on whether it's on Twitter or on sports shows, like there were at times where Matt Canada would call decent games. Like there were a few games this season where we could say, like, yeah, that was a pretty decently called game. Like even the game that we both attended, the Tennessee Titans game, like overall, like, yeah, there's a couple bad plays that stick out, but overall that was a pretty good called game. And I feel like with Faulkner and with Sullivan calling the plays right now, I just feel like we haven't had, granted the sample size is a lot smaller, but I feel like we haven't had a game where we're like, wow, they actually called a pretty good game.
Well, it's been the Cincinnati one, which I thought was okay. I think the execution was just better from Kenny and a lot of the players on offense, other than obviously scoring points. But then, yeah, arguably three far worse than anything that Canada did in Arizona, New England, and Indy. So, yeah. And of course, that was with Mitch for a lot of the time, 2.5 of those games. So that almost comes back to what you were saying about, like, hard to evaluate things because of how many things have been moving around. But okay, you mentioned unified, and I wanted to bring up one last thing here, Steelers, before we get into some questions that we went to social media for. And George Pickens has caused quite a stir for a couple reasons. One, a play on Saturday, Jaylen Warren has the ball in his hands going towards the end zone. George Pickens just refuses to block anybody, and 3 guys are on Jaylen Warren in this situation when it could have been, at the very worst for Jaylen Warren having to break a couple tackles as opposed to being 3 guys swarming on him and just having no effort from George Pickens to block on this play. I saw people posting the clip about it and obviously didn't love it, but I was like, man, how is he going to, we know he's going to be asked about this. He's a guy that typically ducks the media, but at some point you have, like, he has that obligation, like that is in their contract, that he has to speak to the media. So whenever he does, inevitably, what is he going to say? There's no way that he can make this worse, right? He made it worse because his answer for why he was not blocking on that play was that he didn't want to risk injury after seeing how Tank Dell, a receiver for the Houston Texans, season was ended in a similar fashion. You got to be kidding me. Now, we'll come back to that part because then he's also still talking about this play, but bringing the media and the fans having an opinion of this play and saying that their opinion's not worth anything to him because they haven't played football. They're just talking. Man, okay, first off, how many athletes say that? Like, there's former athletes that are in the media that are criticizing him for the play. So they're the ones really that are on talk shows, podcasts, whatever it might be. They are the ones that are talking about his lack of effort on this play and saying that just wouldn't fly on the team that they played for. Of course, fans and people in the media also had opinions, people that didn't play, and I think that they're entitled to those. Heck, his head coach, Mike Tomlin, the previous day when talking about it, said these guys should expect to be analyzed for their play on the field by people. That's the profession that we're in. Then the next day, one of this coach's players says this. So you lose me there. But I want to get back to the blocking thing because that is what I take more issue with. You play in the NFL, a contact sport. At times, as a wide receiver, your team runs the football. When that is the case, you are expected to run block. George Pickens has no intent of run blocking, apparently, because he is worried about getting hurt in the process of doing so. I watched plays last year where at times he was, I would consider him a dominant blocker at times from what I saw last year. So I don't know what's changed, what has happened with him. Very clearly just not having fun playing football right now. And I get it within this offense, but you don't have everybody else in this offense mailing it in the way that he seemingly has. And I don't know how, whatever the answer was, I don't know what he said to his teammates following this. I don't know what he said to Jaylen Warren following this specifically, because you just showed this guy that you're not willing to put in the work for him when you know he would do the exact opposite for you. And Jaylen Warren said as much. If that's him with the ball, I'm blocking for him. This is really bad for me. People think that like it's being overblown. I don't know how, because how do you express to your teammates that when you don't have the football in your hands, you have no interest in being part of the play because you're afraid of getting hurt? You can get hurt at any time doing anything. You're playing in the NFL, pal. I don't know what you think is going to happen, but I just, man, I'm very frustrated with George Pickens right now.
It's like that catch last year against Cleveland where he dove out on his back for the ball. You're telling me that that's not a play where you're completely exposed?
You're throwing caution to the wind there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's bad. I think that's bad. The play itself, yeah, it definitely looks bad, but then to have that being said, that's even worse in my eyes. And I just imagine what do you think the reaction would have been like if this wasn't happening in 2023 and this was happening in the mid 2000s on a team with a guy like Hines Ward, who is known as one of, if not the best blocking wide receiver of all time, and just the aggressiveness and the passion that those guys had on the field on those teams. I just can't imagine what it would be like in a locker room if he said that, if this was like 2005. And then when you have a guy like Hines Ward on the team, obviously they don't have that. But I also want to touch on the whole, because I was thinking about it when you said it. Whenever he brought up that you don't play football, you didn't play football, so you can't say anything.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Obviously, a lot of people, maybe they haven't played football, but a lot of people have played football at any level, and they have played sports as well. So they understand effort. They understand that part of the game. And myself, obviously, I never played any higher than high school. I played in high school, and that was it. And I just was imagining, as you were talking, there was a play where, so I was a guard, for anybody who's wondering. I played guard, so we had a play where we'd run a waggle route, and we would have our fullback run out into the flat, and I would pull around and I would block for him out in space. I'm just imagining myself, and if I just said, "Nah, I don't want to get hurt," so I pulled and I didn't touch anybody. Like I didn't.
Literally
I didn't
every offensive lineman.
I didn't make an effort to do anything. Or if I pulled on like a trap play and I didn't want to hit the end guy because I don't want to get hurt. So I'm just going to let my running back get absolutely demolished by whoever is on the end. That to me, the whole, you didn't play so you can't say anything. Like, obviously we didn't play at that highest level. We didn't have the skill set you had, but a lot of people still played. So they fully understand the effort that comes on a play like that, whether that's in high school, Pee Wee, college, or the NFL. And to say that you don't want to get hurt on a play where maybe Jaylen Warren doesn't score, but still you're on the goal line too. That's another thing, is like you could have potentially scored a touchdown on this play if you had blocked. We don't know. That's another thing that I think is even worse too, is that not only do you think that you have the right to say that to people, but also I feel like that's so much worse because, yeah, we didn't have the skill to make it to where you are, but we understand the situation of that play because we did play football or we did play sports in general. We're still able to grasp that. So for him to even say that makes it worse.
Yeah, or at some point in some walk of life, you're a teammate for somebody. And in this case, he just showed what a terrible teammate he is and how little he cares about being part of a team when, again, he's not the one with the ball, or, you know, he's not the one with the ball. And I don't know what he said to his teammates following this specifically, because you just showed what a terrible teammate he is and how little he cares about being part of a team when, again, he's not the one with the ball, or, you know, he's not the one with the ball. And I don't know what he said to his teammates following this specifically, because you just showed what a terrible teammate he is and how little he cares about being part of a team when, again, he's not the one with the ball, or, The offense isn't at the level that he would like to be. Everybody on this offense, I'm sure, is very frustrated with the state of this offense, but he is the only one that is doing this. So that is why I take so much issue with it. Again, I don't know how you go for. We actually got some questions talking about George Pickens. Obviously, when we put out that we were looking for questions on the Steelers, so maybe we should just get into those and let the conversation carry over because, again, there's going to be some stuff here regarding him. So actually, this one's pretty funny. So we'll bring this into the conversation with how thin they are at safety. Can Pickens play safety? Hear me out. We never have to worry about a targeting call because with him, we know he isn't going to hit anybody, but he can catch. Yeah, I made a joke that nobody has to be worried about him blocking them on Instagram because he has no desire to block. So and here's the thing. Awesome. And here's the thing. Before we do like move on, and I know that there's going to be some stuff about Pickens again that's going to come up here, but I do want to say this is he is 22 years old. While I am not pleased with what I've seen, and I feel like he's had a bunch of what I would consider isolated instances starting to multiply and turn into instances where it's not isolated because of how many times it's happening. I'm not going to write off a 22-year-old. But what I will say is whether it's somebody needs to get him under their wing, and I really thought that was going to be Allen Robinson. Maybe he's not receptive to what they are trying to tell him or coach into him or whatever, but this is heading down the wrong path quick, in my opinion. And, he doesn't have to answer to me, obviously, but when you have Jaylen Warren speak out about this, when you have Allen Robinson saying, yeah, like he needs to be better in these situations, Eddie Faulkner, Mike Tomlin, when you have a bunch of other people answering for you, you got to have better answers for yourself than the one that he gave. So hopefully that starts on Saturday. But
let me just say, if we're talking about responses to lack of effort on a play, I think Deontay Johnson's I didn't see it on that fumble is way less egregious than what
and I brought that up to Allen. I was like, imagine if Deontay was just like, oh yeah, I mean, I saw it, I just didn't want to get hurt trying to recover the fumble.
Yeah. Whether he was lying or not, him saying I didn't see it is way better than what George said.
Way better PR move for sure. I thought Ross here. Would you move on from Najee and or Pickens? Okay, so Najee's very interesting to me because we've talked about like the lack of leadership that they have on offense. If there's somebody that kind of is that right now, I would say it's him, even though it might be in a different way. But the thing is, we've talked about Jaylen Warren a lot on this episode for reasons that really don't involve Jaylen Warren. He's just been so productive behind him. He's going to cost a lot less. I think you would still need to pair another back with Jaylen Warren, but so for me, it's going to depend on the cost. I'm not picking up his 5th-year option for sure with what it's going to cost there. But if he's interested, and I don't know what he's looking for, obviously, if he's interested in like a short-term deal worth less than $5 million per, then maybe like I consider it. But he's coming back as a guy that's getting less touches than Jaylen Warren, in my opinion, because I think Jaylen Warren, after 2023, you find a way for him to be not like the workhorse, not the bell cow, but the main guy in the backfield. He's the one getting, 20-ish touches per game, whether that is his receiving work or his work on the ground, obviously, as well. So that one is I would be okay with, depending on what Najee's looking for. If he's trying to be, a number one back, even get close to resetting the market, absolutely not. I don't know what he's shown to deserve that. I don't know in his mind again, I don't know what he's looking for. I'm not saying that he is looking for that, but for me, that's where I'm at with that one. For George Pickens, ask me again when the season's over. Because as we sit here right now, I mean, that's kind of where I'm at with him. I don't know how his teammates are going to respond to what he said. Again, when you say something like that and you're just not interested in being a teammate, basically, during a play, how does everybody else react to that? I'm curious as to what these last 3 games look like If there's one more instance, obviously that's done for me. But if I don't even see drastic improvement in these areas in terms of run blocking or commitment to the offense, even when the ball isn't in his hands, I'm on the phones with teams when the season ends and looking to get him somewhere else. He is clearly the type of guy that needs a wake-up call. I just don't know if Pittsburgh is going to be able to be the team to do it. Like, is he the type of guy? He needs knocked down a peg, maybe more than one. Is he the type of guy that the only way to get a wake-up call is a change of scenery? And saying...
And Tomlin made it clear that the wake-up call wasn't going to happen this week because he said he's playing on Saturday.
Well, that goes into our next question, actually. So I don't know if you have thought... Give your thoughts on Najee and Pickens.
First, on Najee. Wow, dude. Smitty buys a Jaylen Warren jersey and suddenly he hates Najee Harris. No, I actually, and my answer is going to think I hate him worse. He's a running back, so I don't really want to pay him anything. In terms of what he brings to the offense from a leadership standpoint, I was actually thinking about that. Who is the leaders, especially the vocal leaders on that offense? And I feel like Najee is probably number one outside of Kenny. And so when you look at something like that, that's a not tangible asset that somebody brings to your team, obviously you can't replicate that on a box score. It makes the decision a little tougher, but like you, I would entertain the idea with certain precautions, saying when it comes to like term and how much like annual value a contract would have, like what his cap hit would be.
Would you give him 2 years at $8 million total? Yeah,
like 4 per for 2 years. Yeah. I'd do that. Especially because I think that while obviously he hasn't been the bell cow that people have hoped he would be whenever he was drafted. He's been a very serviceable running back, but he hasn't been like a
durable
elite running back.
Yeah.
He has been durable as well. I would say that I think with him and Jaylen Warren, that's a duo that you'd like to keep together if you could for a certain price. Just because I feel like they play off each other really well. So if they went with that, I'd be okay with it. But I also am one for I'm okay to cut ties, draft another running back when you need to, or sign one, whatever you need to do. Because I kind of treat running backs pretty harshly. That's just how I view them. Not the player himself, just that position. I'm pretty hard.
I guess we should throw in a scenario where
I
didn't touch on this, but I guess we should throw in the scenario like we're saying not to pick up the 5th-year option, but that's not like he's still under contract the last year of his rookie deal for next season. So maybe like Ross is throwing out here a trade scenario too. I don't know what type of asset somebody would give you for him. I would probably entertain the idea, even if we're talking for sure a 3rd or higher. I don't know how much higher it would be than a 3rd, but even if it's like a 4th that you feel like is going to be like an early 4th, I might consider it.
Yeah,
definitely a 3rd though. Definitely a 3rd or higher.
Yeah, I would entertain that idea. And then as far as Pickens goes, honestly, your answer surprised me a little bit. I didn't know that you were going to be that harsh on him. Yeah, I didn't think that you were going to be.
To show you, I'm typically very pro player. But like,
you're very pro player, and whenever fan bases are coming at a player, you tend to defend the player over agree with the fan base.
I don't know what there is to defend here. And again, it's not so much the comments about the media and the fans, like that stuff, whatever, I brush off because people say stupid
I just think it's
things.
a stupid comment.
Yeah. He's 22 years old.
Ignorant comment.
Yeah. The thing about the blocking, being a bad teammate when you're starting to talk about not being willing to give effort for the other guys in that room, it obviously doesn't directly impact me, but the impact that it has on your teammates in this team is why I feel the way that I do about it. I just don't know how you go back to those guys again and all of a sudden expect like, oh, I'm 100% committed. I'm bought in all of a sudden when you just said that you weren't willing to block on a play because you were worried about getting hurt. I don't know. Again, I'm not completely writing this off, but if nothing changes from December 20th to whenever they play their last game, I'm trading him in the offseason.
Is this the layers of the onion coming off? Is this why he was the 7th wide receiver taken in his draft? Is this why he was a 2nd round player? Are we starting to see what people were concerned about coming out of Georgia?
Yeah, I mean, maybe a little bit. I think that there's, when people talk about red flags, it can mean a lot of different things. I think that we knew, relatively immature for, 22 years old. Not everybody has the same maturity level or becomes mature at the same time. Very clearly a lot of growing up to do there. There wasn't like a ton of the off-field stuff actually happened before Georgia. I don't know if I've referenced it on here before. I don't want to get too far into it, but there was something that happened where he and some of his other teammates in high school were suspended from their team for bullying somebody. And so there was something there right away. You're talking about a high school kid. Like, so how long are you going to hold that against somebody? But that was one of the red flags that people were referencing and that got brought up at the combine by scouts and people. The stuff at Georgia, whatever it was, I don't know. Again, these are isolated instances that just keep stacking to the point where now you're talking about like a resume of red flags, if you will. And, how long do you want to keep doing? Mike Tom, and this is me talking as what I would do. I don't know that the Steelers are anywhere close to there yet with him, because Mike Tomlin was talking about it, and like they said that they invested in not just the player but also the person. Like they are committed to making him better, not just as a player, but the person that he is as well. So I don't know. I mean,
so it's a reclamation project. What are we doing?
That's what I'm saying. Like, what can you, and a lot of people have blamed, Tomlin, the culture, the coaching staff. Like, what do you want them to do? Hold this 22-year-old, like, he's not a kid, this 22-year-old guy's hand the entire time. Like, how much should be put on him? I don't think much at all should be put on the organization for what George Pickens has done. Now, if you're talking about how to go about disciplining him or something from this point forward to try to get through to him, then it obviously is a conversation about the organization. Actually, let's go there now, because Heather, this is, I think, the last question that we got Steelers related, said, if you were the head coach, what if any, oh no, there's one more, but it's not related to George. If you were the head coach, what, if any, action would you take regarding George Pickens and his effort, especially given how the Chooch situation was handled? Very good point here by Heather, because if you're talking about the standards should be the same across the board, right? It already hasn't, because Chooch Okorafor lost his job and probably should have happened for performance, or if you want to say Broderick Jones should have been in the lineup for performance regardless. Now, if you want to say it was Chooch or Dan Moore Jr., the argument to be made there. But Chooch comes out of the lineup because of comments made during the Jaguars game. Deontay Johnson, that situation happens. He apologizes to the team, apparently, like had to get up in front of them and apologize, and that was the end of it. Didn't miss any time, wasn't benched for a half, nothing like that. Now, I get it. They need him. Very important player, and I love Deontay. You know that. I'd probably come off as an apologist for him more than anything else. Now, this George Pickens situation. If you're going to be consistent across the board, George Pickens should be benched, right? Or, I mean, you could say they already haven't been consistent because nothing really happened with Deontay other than him apologizing in front of the team. But if you're really looking to send a message, how can you send a message while also acknowledging, like, George is very important to this team? We don't stand a chance without him, especially with what else they have in that wide receiver room. I get it's a slippery slope to walk, but what kind of message are you sending? Like, how upset is Chooch Okorafor right now? If, we're talking about him losing his job over this according to Tomlin himself, because again, for performance reasons, you could argue it should have happened regardless, but it was a decision based off comments made. Now you have a couple other instances involving your receivers where that same standard was not put upon them. For me, what I would do is I'm not totally benching him, but I'm probably sitting him for a couple series in this game to start out. Not introducing, I don't know if it's the offense or defense, but if it's the offense for whatever reason, he's not being introduced with the starters. They already did that once this year, and he's not playing the first couple series of this game. And then you go from there.
I think they moved the goalpost a little bit, especially because of the position that
very clearly
both George and Deontay play. Like, obviously, whether you're looking at what happened whenever Deontay had his thing or this with George now, it's very clear to look behind those guys and say that, hey, we can't really take these guys out because we've got nobody to replace them. Not sure we want Calvin Austin and Miles Boykin to have this much of a role moving forward. So we are going to have to just roll with the punches on this one. I think it sets a terrible example for the team, for Mike Tomlin in general, just because. And I'm not trying to take like huge shots at Tomlin here, like for over this, but I just think it makes a terrible example for your team, because it's like, dependent on your position or who you are, you can get away with stuff. But because they had a guy who was in the ranks that was easily accessible, that they were probably looking to move up anyway because he was their number one pick, you are easily replaceable if you choose a core for, but you're not that if you're Deontay Johnson or George Pickens specifically in this conversation. I think that's unfair. And if I'm a player, I very much disagree with that policy, because while I don't know that I'd necessarily bench him, I'd probably do something closer to what you're doing. If the standard is the standard, standard is the standard, except when it isn't.
Yeah, it sets a very dangerous precedent going forward if you're doing nothing. Now, I don't know. Maybe the guys in that room are completely okay with how things have been handled with George and going back with Deontay. I'm not viewing that anywhere close to this situation again, because of the comments made afterwards, and just me believing this is just a moment of him showing that he's not a very good teammate. But yeah, I agree. And now, okay, so we can bring Tomlin into the situation, because maybe I mentioned last week, I'm not sure that, but now really, like, how much, again, I feel like I've come off as an apologist for Tomlin for a long period of time. This is the first time where I felt like I am okay if they go in a different direction, and potentially even on board with them going a different direction, based off of not knowing what the power struggle is internally with the way that the coaching staff works, specifically on the offensive side of the football. If Tomlin came into this year completely okay with the staff that they had, including, who it was and the number of people that they had, then I think that he is primarily to blame and he should not be back in 2024. If he was handcuffed by Rooney on this, meaning, Matt Canada had to be back because he's under contract, you can't hire anybody else to the staff, then I don't know how much blame I can really put on Tomlin for the offensive struggles. That's kind of where I'm at with him. But again, this is pretty crazy for me to say sitting here now, that going into as we wrap up this season, going into next season, this is the first time in his entire tenure where I've been okay if they go a different direction. Again, if I knew that he was the one that brought back the staff and it was his decision to do so, I'm on board. I think he's got to go.
Especially in a year where after 2023, he's got 1 year left on his contract.
Yeah. Well,
and the Steelers were planning on extending him ahead of the 2024 season.
Let me ask you this, because this came up in a group chat that I was in today. How would you approach this? Because for me, I am either, you have two options, and none of them include letting him go into next season without doing anything on the last year of his contract. You trade him if you want to go a different direction, if he wants to go a different direction. Jay Glazer threw out Washington, and it was not like it was an opinion piece. It wasn't like a report or anything, or a rumor or anything like that. But he's friends with Tomlin, like good friends with Tomlin. So would Jay Glazer throw that out there if he knew that there was no shot of Tomlin having any desire to coach anywhere else? I don't know. That is also Tomlin's hometown team. That's who he grew up rooting for, was Washington. So maybe something there. But I'm either trading him, whether it be to Washington, or somewhere else, and recouping something, or, and this is going to sound crazy to people and be like the least scenario that they want, I'm extending him and completely revamping the offensive staff with a different vision. Because I'm not losing him after next season for absolutely nothing. I think he's too valuable of an asset for whatever Steelers fans want to say. Even if I'm saying that I would go a different direction, it's not because I think he's a bad head coach. I think he's one of the best head coaches. But when it's time with a certain organization. I think he could go somewhere else and be fantastic. I just don't know that that's going to happen in Pittsburgh because of the lack of vision that there seemingly is, whether it's with him, whether it's above him, everything included on the offensive side of the football with the way that the league is trending. So you either extend him and totally revamp the offensive staff, or you trade him, in my opinion. Those are the two things that I would be looking to do.
I think that if he extended after 2024 or before 2024, I guess if it happened, it's going to happen before next season. At least
it
I
would
would
happen this
assume.
offseason. Yeah.
I would assume because like I think back to like Moneyball whenever Billy Bean didn't extend the A's manager, and it's like there's not a lot of faith there when you're on a 1 year in the final year of a contract and you don't have an extension. But as far as Tomlin goes, there's been a lot of stuff that has come up in recent years, and especially a lot going on this year, where I have started to question, like, is it not necessarily should they get rid of him this season, but is the door getting closer for Tomlin eventually, whether that's by his terms or by the team's terms, is the door getting closer for an exit for Mike Tomlin and the Steelers? Not necessarily after this season, but just like in future seasons. It just feels like, obviously, being with an organization for 18 years, you don't know how much farther along you're going to play or coach a team after that. But being here as long as he has, I feel like you could probably say that, and at least for me, it feels like you're almost in the twilight of Tomlin's career as a Steelers coach, or getting towards that moment. For me, I just get that feeling. And when it comes to an extension for him, if they bring him back, as far as revamping the offense goes, this might be harsh. I don't want him to touch it. I don't even want him to have any input because of how bad the offenses have been for the past 5 years under Mike Tomlin. And obviously he's a defensive-minded head coach, and he's not the sole guy making the offensive decisions, but ultimately he's been in on who they have brought in and given the okay. And if I'm above him, if I'm Omar Khan, if I'm, friggin' Art Rooney II, I am basically saying, like, you have no say in as far as like who offensively we're bringing in, because we need to completely overhaul this thing. And that honestly should happen, I think, as early as this offseason, even if he doesn't have an extension yet. I feel like that should happen because of the glaring problem that you have offensively.
Yeah, and then that creates a different conversation, because it's like, what if Tomlin, who's, obviously he's earned a lot, everything, like, but what if he's not okay with not having that input? Then it becomes an even different conversation. Then it's a tougher thing. Like, okay, well then maybe you go a different direction for that reason, because he's wanting to have input, obviously with his staff, as most head coaches do. So yeah, there's a lot of layers to this conversation. But I just wanted to bring that up because, again, as somebody that has been pro Tomlin through and through every step of the way, this is the first time where I'm starting to question if he still is the guy going forward. John mentioned here, and this will tie in, if Tomlin and the Steelers do part ways, who are some head coaching candidates you would be interested in? Obviously there's the ones that come to mind for every team that's going to be looking for a head coach, right? Ben Johnson of the Lions, very much going to be in the mix in this cycle, I would think. Potentially Eric Bieniemy would come to mind, depending on what Washington does. I just mentioned if Tomlin ends up getting a job in Washington, does he retain Eric Bieniemy? Is that a duo that could work? Or does Bieniemy, did he only take that job in Washington because he assumed, like, hey, at some point here, Rivera is not going to be here, whether it's retirement or being fired, and was he kind of promised that he would be the guy in waiting? So they come to mind right away. Could Bobby Slowick be one and done as an OC in Houston with the work that he's done with CJ Stroud? I think he comes to mind right away. Frank Smith, who's the offensive coordinator of the Dolphins, I think should get a pretty good look with the work that he's done there. Shane Waldron, who's the OC in Seattle, is a guy that I mentioned. I wanted him to be the OC when we hired Matt Canada. I mentioned him, and I mentioned Pep Hamilton were the two guys that I really wanted to be. I wanted one of those two to be the Steelers OC. But let me throw one at you that's not on the offensive side of the football. Now, I prefer it go the offensive side, because let me bring up a staggering thing to you. There are 14 teams that are going to make the NFL playoffs, right? If the season ended today, 2 of the head coaches on those playoff teams are defensive minded. You got John Harbaugh of the Ravens and Todd Bowles of the Buccaneers. Everybody else comes from the offensive side of the football. I just think that's the way that the league is trending. But speaking of John Harbaugh, how sweet would it be if you are going to go defensive minded here? would it be to poach the defensive coordinator of the Baltimore Ravens, the number one defense in football right now, in Mike Macdonald, who I think is doing a fantastic job. So if the Roonies stick to their ways of going defensive minded, which, by the way, yeah, if they made an offensive minded hire, it would be the first head coach that they have done that with. They typically go defense. So let me bring that name up as kind of a dark horse here is Macdonald, because he kind of fits, I feel like, the mold of that they would go there. Now, the good thing with him is being a fresh head coach. I would be curious. Now, he would probably still get to pick his staff, but I would trust him more in terms of building an offensive staff that kind of fits more towards, today's NFL style mold. And then I feel like we kind of got to throw Brian Flores in there as well. Familiarity with the organization. Obviously, he might be one and done as the defensive coordinator in Minnesota, which doing excellent work with that team considering the talent level of that defense. But those are some names that just popped into mind right away for me.
I'll be completely honest. Whenever you were mentioning Harbaugh and the Ravens, my mind, for some reason, I thought you were going to go Jim Harbaugh instead, and not the Ravens defensive coordinator. I thought you were going to go Jim Harbaugh as like a meme or something. Because I would pass on that if I'm being completely honest. Another guy that I would be interested in, just because over the past couple seasons, this offense has taken a lot of strides. I mean, the team in general, but like the offense has made a quarterback that everybody had written off look pretty decent. Ben Johnson with Detroit, their offensive coordinator. I'd be interested in that too, as far as an offensive mind goes. And if I had my personal preference, I would honestly probably prefer the offensive side, offensive minded coach, just because I feel like defense has never been a struggle for the Steelers, at least not in the majority of their history. I mean, obviously we had those struggles in the 2010s where we would score 30 plus points a game, but we couldn't stop them. And so I think back to that Jaguars playoff game. But for the majority of the history, like defense has come to the Steelers. And so if you're looking for someone to turn around an offense, if you're bringing in a defensive guy, I would kind of have a similar mindset of the way I even like handle Tomlin right now. It's like where I don't know how much, like I want a completely like revamped overhaul of the offense still. And so as a defensive minded guy, like I feel like I would just have my cautionary tape up at first. And like, it's honestly like, I don't know that I'd be able to trust that the offense is just going to fix itself, even if they brought in a new staff without an offensive minded coach. And maybe that's just because for basically our entire lives and for mostly everybody's lives, the Steelers have always had a defensive head coach. So
yeah,
it's hard to even imagine an offensive minded head coach for the Steelers.
What's funny is if they're going to go defense, I mentioned just the one Macdonald, but like I would pluck from the division. Those are the only three defense. Jim Schwartz, with what he's done with Cleveland's defense, I think he deserves another shot as a head coach. And then Lou Anarumo, who I mentioned with what he's done with Cincinnati's defense, and I think he was the runner-up for the Arizona job last year, it sounded like. Or maybe he turned them down and wanted to stay in Cincinnati. I don't know, but I thought he was going to get that job until they hired Gannon. But yeah, that's the only defensive coaches I'd really be interested in, are right there in the division. Pluck from one of those teams, make them worse in the process of getting your own guy in here. That's kind of where I'm at with
in college.
Yeah, that's tough. It's tough. I don't know of any names that I would really be, at least like, I'd have to do some research. There's nobody on the surface that I can think of that I'm like, yeah, that's the guy right there. That's my name. Now, in terms of a coordinator, probably, but like looking for a new head coach, yeah, I'm sticking to a guy that's, in a coordinator spot right now, most likely. Last one about the Steelers here, and then we will get out of here. Longer episode than I expected. I actually thought this was going to be a little bit shorter one, but I guess thanks to 5-6 questions, we're here. Rudy says, how many opening day offensive starters do we think will be back for the Steelers next year? Over, under 7?
I'm gonna submit like opening day next season.
Yes.
So I'm gonna say Kenny's back.
Okay.
I will say.
Also, I remember Broderick Jones did not start the first game of the season this year. So,
right, and that's why I feel like the question shouldn't be the opening day.
That's probably why they worded it like this, though.
Yeah. Okay, opening day. Kenny will be back. Pat Frymouth will be back. Deontay Johnson.
Okay. That's a little bit because, I mean, they could 1 year left on his deal. He could be a trade candidate, but.
Yeah. James Daniels, I'll say yes.
Yep. I would.
Samalo, I would say yes. Dan Moore Jr. I'd probably say yes to Dan Moore Jr.
But not as a start. Like, he could be on the roster, right? Like, even if you're not viewing him as a starter, I think he's back.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. I'm looking at the day one or the game one starters. Or I'm not even looking at it, I'm thinking of it. Because I don't think Mason Cole's back.
No.
I don't think Chuks Okorafor is back.
No.
I don't think Allen Robinson's back. Was he even a starter? I don't know.
If you want to consider, yeah, maybe.
And I mean, Najee Harris will be back, so that's him.
I think 7 was a good number to set it at. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. And then I mean, George Pickens, up in the air right now. I guess I don't know.
Yeah, for me, I mean, you just list it, but I'll just go through mine. Kenny, Najee, James Daniels, Deontay, Freiermuth, Sayamalo, Dan Moore Jr. I think Pickens is going to be here.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say over 7.
Over.
Yeah, 7 was a good number to set it like right there. Like it's
yeah.
So I appreciate the question. I appreciate all the questions. These are some good stuff. All tied in pretty well. Actually, there is one more question that I feel like I think it kind of goes to all 3. I'd love to know what you think about which team would get a championship next. So it could be the Steelers in this. Given the current state of all 3, I'll ask instead, which team will advance beyond round 1 of a playoff next?
Because I have absolutely no faith in the Pirates, I think there's an argument to be made that by the end of the season, we could say that in 2023, the Pirates were the best team in Pittsburgh.
Possible. Here's the problem. The Steelers and Pirates in the first, for the Steelers, regardless, it's every round is only 1 game. For the Pirates, the first round is only 1 game. For the Penguins, they don't have that luxury. Like, they got to win.
First round 3 games now with wild card in baseball.
You're right. Shortened series as opposed to a 7-game series.
Yeah,
like the Penguins have. That said, as crazy as it sounds with the way that they've looked for a lot of this year, I'm going to say the Penguins.
I'd say the Penguins too. Mainly because I think that a lot of hockey is like getting hot at the right time. So if you say the Penguins did struggle or like teeter-totter for December, January, but then they do in the years that they have won the cup, like I think about that 2009 team, I think about that 2016 team, February on, they were unstoppable. And that's when they started playing like the team that they were when they won the Stanley Cup in those years. So us talking in December right now, like the year they won the Stanley Cup in 2016, they had just a week ago at that time. Now they had fired Mike Johnston, and Mike Sullivan had lost his first 4 games as head coach of the Penguins. So I think the Penguins are probably set up the most to be able to win.
It's got to happen
get past
immediately, like very close. Yeah, very soon.
Yeah. And I feel like, honestly, if you're just looking at the way the teams are set up now, if you're just going based off of their current rosters, the Penguins are the ones that are most set up to win a championship, in my opinion. I think that obviously there's good things about the Steelers, but they're not there. They're not close, I don't think.
Let me do this in the simplest possible terms, the first part of this, because they ended up kind of pivoting from their question. Because they originally said, I'd love to know what you think about which team would get a championship next. Oh, wait, never mind. Because I read it as what each team needs to do to get a championship next. And I was going to say, for the Steelers, find a quarterback and completely revamp what the offensive strategy is. For the Penguins, honestly, like, you're probably a bottom 6 piece and getting good Tristan Jarry every night away from being a legit contender. And for the Pirates, a new owner. There we go.
Yeah, I would say Steelers quarterback, obviously, and just completely revamp the offense. I'd say similarly for like pretty much the same thing with the Penguins too. You just need to find out the right mesh at bottom 6, whether that means bringing in another guy or not, and then just getting more consistent play from not only your goaltender but the guys in front of them. Because, like, I mean, to be fair, the majority of this season we've said that the problem has been the guys in front of our goaltenders, not necessarily our goaltenders.
Hey, by the time people are watching or listening to this, we're going to be releasing the Penguins episode the following day, or maybe it's out right now. So go watch or listen to that one too, because we're going to dive into this, what we're talking about.
And then Pirates, yeah, obviously new owner, but pick a different sport too. I mean, baseball's just unfair. It's some small market teams. It's just an unfair game.
Like, if you're looking for like an actual answer,
you need multiple rotation arms. You need probably at least one or two more bullpen arms. I like a lot of their bullpen, but you need at least one or two more like good bullpen arms. You need a first baseman. You need more consistent hitting throughout the entire lineup, because you can't have 3 or 4 guys that are getting on base for 350 plus and averaging close, like between 280 to 300 hitting and getting a lot of RBIs and all that stuff and producing offense. But then you have 2 guys that are in that like 8-9 hole that are doing absolutely nothing, and their batting average is below their weight. You can't have that on the Pirates. So you need more consistent hitting. You need a first baseman, and you need definitely. I mean, I think the biggest thing is the rotation. I don't think they have a full rotation. They don't have a playoff rotation.
Which, hey, if you're still watching or listening to this episode, we're going to talk about the Pirates also this week. Maybe that episode is out by now, by the time you guys are watching and listening to this. But we're going to talk about some news dropped by Jason Mackey that includes adding to this rotation more than they already have. But that does it. Longer episode than we expect this week. At this point, Tyler and I are probably just talking to ourselves and nobody's watching or listening anymore anyway. So, but if you made it this far, we can't thank you enough for tuning in to another episode of the Around the 412 Steelers show. Check out everything Custom Designs, whether it's the Facebook or Etsy link for our friend Haley Wagner's small business. Get yourself something customized clothing, whether it's a t-shirt, hoodie. Now I'm second guessing if she does sweatpants. Maybe. I don't know. Not hats, though. I know she doesn't.
Are you second guessing if she does hats? Because she doesn't. Just in case you weren't aware.
That. We know that. Yeah. Everything but hats.
If you made it this far into the episode, tweet us the GIF of, I forget his name. He's from the Goonies, but he says, "Hey, you guys."
I don't know who it is.
Tweet us the GIF. You just type in "Hey, you guys" on the GIF thing, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Tweet us that, because I'm curious who has made it this far.
Yeah. God bless you. Merry Christmas, everybody. Maybe you're only watching the Steelers episode this week. We won't be back until after Christmas. And we will be doing, if you donated to Rocking Around the 412, which we haven't mentioned on the show because we are totally wrapped up with that. Actually, the last family just came today to pick up the stuff. So completely done with it.
Sloth. That's his name.
There we go. You're eligible to win one of the prizes. We're going to be doing that as well following Christmas, but we aren't there yet. Just wanted to throw that out there. Wish everybody a happy holidays, happy, healthy holidays. Spend the time with your family. Enjoy the time of year. My favorite time of year. For Tyler, for Smitty, this has been the Around the 412 Steelers show. We'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.